All right, moving on to Le Mans. Noah Penda plays for Le Mans Saraf Basket. He is had previously played for, I believe it's Yavishi, but it could be just JA too. But anyways, listed at 6'8", 225. He's a January 7, 2005 birthday. So notably, not just older than all these guys we've talked about so far, but a solid bit older. His rookie season will be his age 21 season. Though, it's close. The cutoff for age blank seasons is February. He's a January birthday. So he would not have been eligible for the draft to be an age 19 rookie anyways. But still, it's worth noting. He is this season for a really solid Le Mans team. In comparison to Traore, much better. Their team was comfortably a better team, top to bottom. And this season he averaged 10.4 points, 5.4 rebounds, 2.8 assists, 1.3 steals, zero point 0.9 blocks on 45.2, 34.3, 69 shooting splits. For a few more advanced stats, the one thing I really wish I could find was free throw rate. It's really hard to find free throw rate for some of these European guys. I do think that is my prediction is that he has a pretty high free throw rate, especially in big games. It feels like he got to the line a ton, but I don't have that number down. But for the advanced stats, he played in 34 games. Has a 56.4 true shooting, 7.8 offensive rebound rate, 18% defensive rebound rate, 16.2 assist rate to a 14.9 turnover rate, 2.5 steal percentage, 3.7 block percentage, 18.3 usage rate, 119.5 offensive rating, and a 110.5 defensive rating. So there's definitely some good stuff in there. Would also note that the assist to turnover is 1.7, and that's been a consistent positive throughout his career. Has been a positive assist to turnover guy. Some other kind of historical trends that I do think is worth noting. The last 2 years he was a much worse shooter, and he's kind of steadily improved both in terms of volume and efficiency. So 2 years ago, for Yavishi, he shot 21.4% on less than an attempt per game. And then the next year he took 2.2. I'm guessing he got some draft feedback and said, you got to get that bitch up. So he shot more, but only shot 26.5%. And then this year he shot even a little bit more, 3.1 3-point attempts per game, and shot 34.3%. Though it is worth noting that the free throw percentage, while it has improved a little bit, not still kind of below the general watermark of 70% at 69% this year. It was 66.9 the year before, and 2 years ago it was all the way down to 39.4, which is like kind of insane. But anyways, he has a really interesting statistical profile in that, for a league that is not, crazy in terms of defensive production, he had crazy steal and block rates. And he was not playing in a scheme that was like as extreme as Ulm's, where they're like in every passing lane and they're trying to get out and get steals like that. He really was the only guy on his team, really getting steals like that, which is, I think, worth noting, that it was not, as big of a difference, or as big of a organizational focus as it seemed like it was for Ulm. So Stone, I do want to start with that defense. Tell me a little bit about what you like so much about Noah Penda defensively.
Yeah, I think there's a lot to like. I mean, first of all, like just to set the stage, I think you can make an argument that he was like maybe the best defender in the second or third best league in the world. This year, it was probably either him or Andre Robertson, who just completely dominated defensively. And I think there's a lot of things to go into with Penda. The biggest thing for me is that he, on both ends of the court, but obviously we're focusing on the defense here, but he's just such a good decision maker that I think he's always in the right place at the right time. And that leads to a lot of being able to get his hand on a ball in double teams or even though we'll talk about the verticality, he's not much of a vertical threat, but he can position himself well enough to be able to catch a guy off guard, and as they're have their head looked down or away and start to get into a shooting motion, he already is there vertically with his hands up, ready to be a stalwart near the rim. I think that he's a great lateral mover. He's fantastic at being able to move across the paint when needed, but also across the perimeter. And I think it allows him to stick with a little bit quicker guys that normally players of his size and frame wouldn't be able to do. The hips are a bit slow defensively, but I think, like I said, he makes up for it a bit with just how quickly laterally he moves. That he's going to be able to mitigate some of that against certain drivers. I think that he just sees the right things at the right times, and ultimately, it's really difficult to be bad defensively when you're that on point so often. And for me with Penda, it's all about positioning and seeing things as as they happen and getting himself there in time, and he can do it. We've talked in the past about guys who see things defensively, but they just aren't physically able to get there in time. That they're great processors, but they can't get there. I think with the lateral mobility that Penda has, verticality wise, maybe he's not the best low man help side rim protector because he's just not much of a vertical threat. But he positions himself so well and gets there, when he needs to. That I think it's something you don't see this often. You don't see this combination of processing and also being able to laterally get yourself there. So I think that's really what sets Penda apart as a defender for me.
I should quickly jump in here and set the stage in a way. I should have before I threw it to someone. This is bad hosting. We have someone who is very high on Noah Penda here. Someone who it sounds like might be out on Penda. And I am, as you can see in my byline, the Penda centrist. I really don't know where I'm going to fall, and so I'll have my thoughts that I want to talk through, but I do kind of want it to be said that I don't mind a little bit of gladiator Thunderdome action here. So Coop, I'll let you take it away on what you don't like about the defense.
Yeah, I do. I will start out with the good, is that I do think that he was such a good stopper at times in the league he was in that guys would see him on an island and then just immediately pass out. Like they would have him completely ISO'd, completely strong-sided, have whatever the hell they want, and they would just not even try. I do worry that he's just, because of my two big worries are just that as good as the event creation is for the league, he could be so much better, but he's almost like too committed to just doing the right thing. And it's like he could get his hands involved in a play where he's in great great help positioning, but he refuses to even like dig in and get himself slightly out of position when he can still make the closeout to his man. Right? He'll be standing directly behind a driver or next to a driver and not even contest, not even put his hands up. And it's like, the shot isn't going out to your guy. So help even just give a little bit more and be prepared to shoot back out to your guy. You're mobile enough to do it. Like he's a very laterally quick and he's pretty good a pretty good mover for his size and his weight. And he just doesn't fully utilize it because he's too committed to staying in scheme, not making mistakes. And I do think that if you go too far in that way, it's detrimental, to your defense, because you are not, putting the amount of pressure on poorer offensive players that you could be. Right. I think he lets bad offensive players get away with stuff far too often that he could just completely blow up and completely explode. Also, his lack of verticality makes it really hard for him to help around the rim. And if he is not in perfect box out positioning, he is not a very strong rebounder, because guys, if he doesn't have, if he's not early into his box out and he's not clearing guys out of the way, he's just not going to grab very many rebounds. And he's usually there, and it usually is pretty solid. I think he's a decent box outer, but he's not good enough for it to just be the only way he gets rebounds and clear possessions. So I kind of worry about that, and I worry about a guy who's four-sized and just is not very much of a deterrent or like a help around the rim. And maybe that can be changed. Maybe in an NBA scheme, that kind of thing can be fixed with the coach telling him, over and over, you need to be doing more. We would rather you make a few mistakes than just kind of stand there and do nothing. But he also, as like a low man, because his hips don't flip very well, the main way he gets beat as a perimeter defender is that he's closing out, and he just cannot change direction with faster players. Right. And he's really good at knowing his body and going like out to his man. And if they make a pass, he's really good at knowing where the pass is going to go and then changing his closeout to that guy and knowing how to get his body there. But if the guy does something that he doesn't anticipate, which can sometimes happen, he can just kind of just get completely dusted and out of a play. So I like him. I like the defense. I like the defense. We'll talk about the offense, but the defense is good, but I don't think he's like, I think Roberson is a really interesting comparison point because Roberson was just such an elite stopper at the kind of stars of his time, these kind of slightly bigger guards who were shiftier and a little stronger, and he could stick with those guys so well that he was able to stay on a team. And as the league got a little bigger and it got a little faster, and he got a little older, obviously, he kind of faded out of the league. And as guys needed to be able to do more offensively, he kind of faded out of the league. And maybe Penda, you see him like as a specialist, he could be really great at guarding these bigger, stronger advantage creators. Pretty solid, like the Cade Cunninghams of the world, or the Luka Doncic's. These guys who just use strength so well, and I think he would be really good at guarding these guys because he is strong. He's laterally quick. A great combination of those two things. But is that specialty enough to make up for, lacking in a few other key areas? I don't know. So that's kind of my worry with Penda is that the defense is not as unassailable as I think it would have to be a defense-only prospect.
Yeah, so I find this really interesting on both sides, and I think there's parts where I fall on either side. I have been burned before by betting on these technically correct but under athletic European defenders before, most notably of which Usman Garuba, I would say, but even other guys. I mean, there have been guys who I really, really liked for whatever reason that were, technically really sound defensively, but weren't athletic enough to necessarily, make a consistent impact. Like this is not a level of defender that like Andre Jackson Jr. was when he was coming out, or guys like that. This is much closer to like, and I liked this guy like a Seth Lundy type defender. To where I agree, like he's not so good defensively, he can be a defense only guy. There has to be something else in his game for him to hang his hat on, and we'll talk about those other things. But focusing specifically on the defense, I think the best skill Penda has on both ends is that he is an extremely quick processor who makes good decisions quickly and consistently. He is pretty good at knowing, who he's guarding in terms of how much space he can give them, in terms of knowing, what are his help responsibilities as he switches. Lamons did a lot of switching, and, especially off-ball actions. And Penda was really, really good at knowing how to switch from being the low man to his guy setting a flare. So, he's then switching out and stuff, whatever. He was really good at that type of stuff. And, obviously that's really evidenced by the steal and block rates. Like, I'd agree that he's not a huge factor at the rim. Most of his blocks are, he blocked quite a few jump shots. And then most of his blocks are, he meets guys pretty early. they bump into him and he absorbs the contact, and then as they're kind of, falling or fading away, he's able to block the shot low. He's not like rotating from out of area and flying towards the rim to block a shot or anything. They're all, 90% positioning blocks. Which is, in some ways great. Like, it's good that he can do that, but I do agree with Coop that his low man effectiveness might be oversold by the block rate. There's quite a few times where, while he is good at verticality, and he's really good at not fouling. Like, just in general, like, he doesn't really foul that much. And I think some of that is that he knew he needed to play on this team. Like, this team had good players, the 2D2 guys and Hudgens and Buchanan and David DeLeo. This was a talented team, but a lot of it works because of Penda. And I do think that's important. So he's really good at not fouling, but there are times where, even though he absorbs contacts in his chest, he's not crazy long. I don't think he's not crazy tall. Like, the standing reach, I don't think is super impactful. And so guys can kind of go through him and finish over him. And, even though he's absorbing contact with verticality, he's not really affecting shots all the time. Especially, there's multiple teams in the French and in the Jeep Elite League that, have a lot of former NBA players. And there are times where he really struggled with them, especially on the perimeter. Like, Andre Roberson dusted Penda like 4 times. And that's not a great sign. That, on the perimeter, I think he's pretty hit or miss. I completely agree with Coop that on closeouts he's really bad. And I think the biggest issue with his defense overall is that even though he's really smart, like, the ground coverage is not very good. He can't really, sprint low, sprint out, close out, change direction, stymie a drive, pass comes out, then sprint into a help position and continue. He is more of a, similar to Colin Murray Boyles, where even if he's not a one effort guy in terms of motor, he almost becomes like he can make one play defensively. And then once he has to start covering multiple things, it's going to be a real issue. And I think that limits his ceiling in terms of he can't. I don't think there's a word he can be like an all defense guy because he's not quite good enough on the ball. I think he's pretty good on the ball, like in one-on-one situations. Like they would put him on Nolan Traore for quite a few isolation possessions, and he was never just getting dusted. But he is more of a kind of funnel to help defender than a completely stymie a guy type defender. And once he is beat, those hips don't move well enough for him to be a real recovery guy. Excuse me. He's at his best really sliding with guys, forcing them towards his help. And then he is a good kind of late contest type guy. That stuff I think is legitimately good. But that's obviously, there's a lot to juggle there. And I think the lack of ground coverage does really worry me, even given the smarts and the reaction time. And again, the physical tools outside of that aren't great. It'd be one thing if, man, the ground coverage isn't great, but he's 6'8" with like a 7'5" wingspan, so he's going to be fine. I don't really think that's the case. Obviously, we don't have official measurements here. Stone might have the Basketball Without Borders measurements, but those would be a couple years old. And he has physically changed what that's. He has noticeably put on weight in a good way, I would say, though, it's maybe affected his vertical athleticism some. But that's, I don't know. Like I kind of fall somewhere in the middle where I think he's an above average defender, but I also agree with Coop that he's not such a good defender that's the sell, where it's like, hey, that's a top 10-ish guy because he's going to be such a good defender, and all he really has to do to be a valuable NBA player is make open shots. So that's Stone. What's your pushback? What are we maybe missing here that is leading you to be so high on the defense?
I don't necessarily disagree really with a lot of what you guys said. I guess I just value what he does maybe more than you guys, where I think that being that level of processor and the intersection of that and the lateral movement, I think is just not very common. And I think there is value in rarity, but there's also value in what he does being able to, like Cooper said too, you're putting him, you could put him on a lot of strong guys that are really strength-based creators. And to be honest, like a lot of the best players are that. Your Tatums, your Lukas, your Cades, and being able to have a guy that can hang with them there's not many in the NBA that currently that can do that, and I think that having someone that can do that is very valuable. And I think being able to put him in a lot of different team schemes where he can make a lot of those quick processing reads and make sure that it runs in a way that and a lot of people hate zone, for instance. I think Penda would be a great zone defender because he's able to stay within his zone, but also, laterally recover in a way that he's not having to worry about ground coverage necessarily north to west, but more, north to south, but more east to west. And I think that it plays to his strengths. Like, I think there's just a variety of ways you can utilize Penda, whether it be someone that is the cog in the machine of a team defense, which is, I think, more and more common in the NBA today, and someone that can switch on to a few different types of players, right? Your big, bulky power forwards, your quicker guards, your strength-based perimeter guys, Tatum's, Luka's, Caves, whatever, and not be afraid that he's going to be completely dusted by those multiple different archetype of guys with the ball in their hands. Like, I think that provides a lot of value. So I think that's just where I fall with him defensively and why I value it so much. And I think that there is worlds where that is so impactful that it is all defensive worthy, in my opinion.
I think it's, for me, this conversation goes back to when Bryce, you and I did we talked about Garuba over the summer, I think, and we talked about it's so hard at 6'7", 6'8". If you're not truly big size, you have to be undeniable defensively. You have to be overwhelming in a lot of different ways. You can't really just be a defensive specialist, and be like a full-time rotation player for an NBA team, at least not anymore. All the guys who have really done that, even in like the last 20 years, have been like, Tony Allen, that like, even going back that far, are truly just overwhelming defenders. A guy like Ajax is just so athletic and so great off the ball and creates so much activity that, maybe that ends up being worth the weirdness on offense. It's the sell has to be, your bar is so much higher if that is what your main sell is, that it just can't be interesting. Like, Garuba was a good defender in the NBA. He was a solid defender, but he couldn't do anything. You couldn't give him the ball. He could not touch the ball on offense, and so he's out of the league. Like, it's as simple as that. If you can't, like, especially if your defense is not completely undeniably game altering, then you have to do something more than just the defense. And I'm not sure that Penda's offense is anything in the NBA. And I think that that's kind of my problem. Are you guys okay with shifting over to the offense?
I do have one kind of last little to talk about here on the defense. I will concur that I do think, one-on-one, Stoney really can guard just about anybody, even quicker guards. I think he's going to be fine on, if not stifling. Again, he'll get scored on, but I don't think he's a guy where, let's say he gets switched onto a Jalen Brunson, you're going to start sweating in isolation. The issue is he can't ever be like a full stopper, because as soon as a screen hits, like, he's never going to get through that, which is, again, not disqualifying for a 6'8", 6'9" guy, but it is, a bit of a somewhat of a concern. He can't be like, Drew Holiday or anything. Like, that's just not who he is. I do think that, with Penda defensively, you mentioned the versatility aspect in terms of maybe to be good in zone, maybe to be good in this and that. I do think something that matters is I do trust that he'd be really good, like, adapting to schemes on the fly. Like, that is a barrier of entry to, really playing in the NBA, is that sometimes a coach, like especially in a playoff series, a coach will draw up a completely different defensive scheme in one day, and you won't even get a full practice for it. And you have to be able to just go execute that. Hey, actually, tonight we've decided that we're gonna do a hard trapping hedge where uh, the tag will communicate when to recover and when not to, based on reading the whether or not the ball handler switches which hand he's going to attack with. Like NBA schemes can be that complicated, and it happens like that. And so I do think Penda, being someone who I really do trust to just be able to do that and pick up on that, does matter. In a very Nicolas Batum-esque way, a Boris Diaw-esque way. And that's really, I think, so much the sell with Penda, is that, hey, he's the next in line of these super high feel French forwards who are just physically strong enough and mentally just do everything you could possibly want. And even if sometimes the skill stuff is maybe hit or miss and the athleticism isn't crazy, they're going to stick because of that. And I do think there's a compelling argument there, though I do see Coop's side. I think I fall somewhere in the middle, where I think if the offense is palatable enough, he's absolutely a valuable starting forward. The question will be, how palatable is that offense? Because if it's not, I don't think there's enough to give him an NBA career just based on his defense. So Coop, where are you at with I know Stone is the positive take, but I want you to kind of tear Noah down first, and we'll let Coop kind of we'll let Stone pick up the pieces.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything that Penda currently does that is NBA level on the offensive end. I think that's kind of the quick sell of it. He's a straight line driver who does not command a closeout because the shot isn't there. He is the thing that really stuck with me when I was watching his tape actually was he is probably the worst transition player that I've watched in a long time. He is out of control. Even if he's making the right plays or the right reads in a situation, he just is. It just doesn't go the way he wants. He's slamming into guys, committing offensive fouls, turning the ball over at a really high rate in transition. It just is really worrying. He can't bring the ball up the court because the handle is these are sub NBA defenders picking his pocket, bringing the ball up the court. He cannot do any of this basic role player stuff that you would want to see him scale back in the NBA, right? He cannot make reads with the ball in his hand. You try and there were probably 3 or 4 isolation possessions I saw in the tape I watched where they completely clear out a side for Penda and he goes nowhere, or he gets downhill and just completely spins and the ball goes 50 feet in the air. He just does not have any kind of control over his body whenever he's moving. He can sit there and he can stand and look pretty, I guess, is kind of how I would describe his offense. But he can't knock down jumpers at any kind of level. He can execute scheme on the perimeter and do some basic weave and handoff stuff. And for me, the biggest thing is that it doesn't matter how good your decision making is if you aren't actually good enough to get the ball and make decisions with it, because he's currently not good enough to have the ability to make decisions offensively. He just he can't make reads because he can't handle the ball. And it just is really, really worrying to me that there's just seemingly not an offensive role for him that isn't just go stand in the corner and pretend you're a threat. And he just at times can't even pretend that he's a threat. So I think that's enough tearing him down. I don't like being mean on this podcast, but Stone, build your boy back up.
I'll let Bryce give the centrist view first, so that we'll end on a fully positive offensive note here.
Yeah. So the centrist view. Well, again, I do think the superpower here is the quick decision making, just how effective he is making decisions at a rapid pace. He does turn the ball over maybe a little bit more than I'd want, but generally his turnovers are trying to make advantaged plays. I think there are a lot of times where connective passing is maybe overrated, including by myself. I think I sometimes overrate connective passing because it's a skill I really love and care about that I don't know if it's actually particularly valuable. But Penda is a great connected passer, and he could absolutely be the type of guy who is a part of, complex offensive plays as the decision maker. The guy who is going to read whether or not the defense is tagging a stagger, or how they're guarding a handoff with a back screen on the other end, or throwing entry passes on flex screens or whatever. Like, he can do, I think, almost anything you want as a standstill passer. The flip side is that on the move, the passing is pretty rough right now. Though it has improved, it's got like his ability to pass with a live dribble has gotten better. It's still not there. Like, he's still not good at it. There are moments, especially when he catches and is able to quick rip, where he is really good at reading whether it should be a dump off or a skip. He plays well off of 2 feet, too. Like, he's not he's not an awful 2-foot player like a Jeremiah Fears is. Like, he can do that stuff, but he's not a creator, right? Like, when we talk about dribble, pass, shoot, wings, I'm not, and how valuable they are, and I still believe that. And obviously, dribble, pass, shoot, wings it's not always, each skill is not always equal, and it's not always a recipe towards stardom. But generally, when I think of dribble, pass, shoot, wings, like a Trey Murphy's a great example. Not a great passer, not a great ball handler, but he can dribble, he can pass, and he can shoot. Well, that's valuable. But you have to be able to actually do all three, and I'm just not fully sold Penda can really dribble. I don't think it's as bad as Coop is saying. Like, I think he's a fine straight line driver. I think he's really good, like, in tight spaces, taking one dribble and hitting a move to finish. Even though he's a bad finisher, and he's also pretty good at getting fouled. Like, I think some of it's his frame. He's an okay contact finisher. I just don't think his touch is particularly good around the rim, and that really hurts him. But the real thing with Penda is going to be, can he change his mentality as a shooter? And this kind of goes to overall player sometimes too. Penda is a very right decision oriented basketball player. And that means that there is way too often where he's not taking a shot, where he's not aggressively looking to drive or find a mismatch in the post, or he's not even aggressively looking to, make a crazy advantaged pass. He just wants to make the right play all the time. And this is not an uncommon thing for French prospects. And I think it's a part of why, outside of the physical freaks, we haven't like the NBA has not been taken over by France in the way some expected, especially given the success of their FIBA teams. Like, there's physical freaks from France, and then there's the occasional Penda-esque guy like a Nicolas Batum that break through. But there's a whole lot of guys who just are so right decision brained that they never develop the level of aggressiveness that it takes to be a real NBA player. Because the truth is, we say a lot of things that matter and what's important, but you have to be able to score in the NBA in 95% of circumstances. Every NBA player except for a very limited number, was a good pre-NBA scorer. They could get buckets one way or another. They even if it was not in the way that translated to the NBA. They have really good touch inside. They're really good shooters. They're great at attacking closeouts. They can get one-on-one buckets against lower level competition. Penda, I'm just not fully sold right now. I do think he's a good shooter. I think he's even a better shooter than the percentages say. But he's oriented towards, the only time I'm going to shoot is if I'm so completely naked wide open, or it's late in the shot clock. And those are the only times he's getting that shot up. He has to change his mentality to be, any slight advantage, I am doing everything I can to exploit that, rather than my goal is to wait until there is a perfect advantage. And that's a real hard mentality change. And that is one of the things that does legitimately worry me with Penda. So Stone, what are we missing here? What's the really positive take with Penda's offense?
Yeah, well, I'll start by saying I do agree that he needs to be more aggressive than he is, and I understand those concerns for sure. Um, I think they can be misconstrued by some people as lack of effort, but I don't think that's the case. I think it's as you're describing wanting to continually make the right decision. But I also think there's a couple factors. One of which is um, his teammates are. He has two very ball dominant teammates who are extremely aggressive, and another great scorer. Shout out David DeLeo. I think he is an NBA player, um, and I think Penda sort of just has really stuck to the role that's been granted to him of you're not necessarily a scorer, you're a cog that makes everything go, but you're not someone that is going to you you're not you're not a better scorer than the two heavy usage guards that he's playing with, right? And I think another aspect that we need to look at here is if you he lacks the aggression, which I'm not making an excuse necessarily for that. But if you zoom out and look at the two prior seasons, and I don't know if you guys or how much of anybody who is watching or listening has seen Penda prior to this year at Yavishi, or however you say it. I'm probably butchering that, but um, he was he almost never took the drives to the rim that he did this year. He rarely attempted them. He never took a lot of the shots that he took this year. There's a lot of he was putting up no dip threes. He was doing a lot of threes that were way more tightly contested than he really ever did prior, at least in the 2 years prior to this season. And that was at a lower level league, right, against competition that is, I would say, significantly worse at the LNB Pro B league versus the Pro A. And the fact that he was doing that against longer and better competition does tell me that there was somewhat of a shift there. Um, as far as the ball handling, like I think the biggest issue is he has a really awkward first dribble. Like that first dribble is he puts it really out to the side of him. And I think that's really the biggest thing. And it makes it prime for him to be pickpocketed. It makes it easy um, to swipe at it. But it's not something that 2024 or 2023 Penda would have really even attempted. Like I think that the shift in that even happening, if you're just looking at this season, I think it's a lot easier to view Penda as someone that is not aggressive. And I still think there are aggressiveness to concerns, to be clear, but I think there is a little bit of more added context of where he started to where he already is in that trajectory, hopefully continuing on from a worse league to a better league. As far as the scoring, he's not a good vertical player. It really, I think, limits his finishing, but he is extremely strong. And because he's such a good decision maker, he really knows when to cut. Again, seems to be a through line with the French prospects, and I'm really interested if anyone that does listen or watch works with French prospects at a youth level. Like, do you guys really emphasize cutting? Because it seems like it. He's really great at that. He's always seeing the right things. I think the processing is not to an elite level, but I think it's to a level that because he's seeing things in totality and because he is it's really driven by good decision making rather than processing, I feel like. And because he's so good at that, it's so difficult for him to make the wrong decision. He's just a good decision making machine, really, is what it comes down to. I think he sees everything properly as a passer, as a facilitator. I think that execution as a passer is still raw. I think the accuracy as a passer is pretty poor right now, and I think that that leads to a lot of the turnovers for me. Is where I at least saw a lot of film on the film. A lot of the turnovers come from is just poor accuracy as a passer, which I think is something that is improvable, and it's a lot more improvable than making the wrong pass accurately. And I think that he makes a lot of great passes. They just don't end up exactly where they should be. I think something that's really interesting with Penda that I noticed and I kind of stuck to as to why I think he can be a really good facilitator that a lot of forwards aren't. In a way that a lot of forwards aren't, I should say, is that he has an extremely long torso, and I think that he is really comfortable with using it to his advantage. So when he's driving, for example, and he's really strong, so when he's coming downhill as a driver, I think not only can he absorb a lot of contact, but he can create a lot of space outside of the strength with his torso because if he's starting from he brings the ball like from one side of his body to the other and that torso radius allows for a huge radius from even though he doesn't have a great wingspan a huge radius for a passing window if he's going for a fake it's hard to explain but hopefully the visual or the visual watchers on YouTube can see this a bit. But as LeBron does when he drives in, right, he goes for that huge overhead step through. When Penda is able to kind of step through in that way, his torso is so long that it creates a massive radius as a passer that he's now able to open up like one whole side of the court as a passer. And I think that a lot of guys that are good decision makers are seeing things and passing when they see it. But I think with Penda, without having a complex handle, is able to create a lot of space with his torso and utilize it in a way that a lot of people just aren't comfortable utilizing their body coming into the NBA. That's a big thing for me if you've listened before, like just utilizing the tools that you have physically. And I think it really comes into play as when you get closer to the rim, right? Because if you have a defender looking at you and you can have these trunk twists directionally, they're looking more at your upper body. And so if you're able to fake one way rather than them looking at your feet, when you're in closer proximity, they're looking closer at your chest, and you can now misdirect them with your torso from one way to another. And it creates a lot of space and opportunity for him as a driver that I don't think a lot of players have. And we combine that with the strength. I think he can get away as somewhat of a facilitator and passer in a lot of ways without having a complex handle. And the handle does have to get better, but I do think this is something that is really useful for him, and he does utilize at a great level. So that's a really nerd out session. Hopefully people are able to follow along a bit with that, but that is a lot of what I think makes Penda exciting as an offensive player. And really quickly, just to jump on the shooting, it has taken leaps and bounds, maybe on par with anyone in this class. Noah Penda would not have taken a lot of the 3-point attempts that he did this year. And the percentage wasn't probably where you want it to be coming in, but from the trajectory, the developmental trajectory from where it was to where it became, the no dip threes, the comfortability, taking things within close proximity of defenders, like that's a lot of big, difficult hurdles that typically non-shooters don't become comfortable doing. And I think Penda taking those steps was really interesting to me.
So my big pushback is that this is a guy who was getting 18 usage in this league, right? This is a guy who is not seeing the kind of usage that you need to be to scale back into an NBA role player. It's a lot harder to just stay doing the same things in the NBA. He has a lot of interesting micro skills as a passer, as a driver, but he just can't access them. Like to me, you're talking about the shooting development. He's taking 1-3 a game. Like that, even if he's hitting that at a 34% rate. In the NBA, if you're only taking one wide open 3 a game or one end of shot clock 3 a game, you're not a shooter. It does not matter how many of those you hit. If you are only taking 1 a game in 20 plus minutes, you are not a shooter. You are not a threat to the defense. And he's still sub 70. He's at 69. So I'm sounding more evil. I'm skewing the perception of him, but he's a 69% free throw shooter. As much as he gets to the line at an interesting rate, I think Tankathon, who is a liar, Tankathon is a known liar. They say his free throw attempt rate is 45%, which is, at least as like a number, sounds about right, and is an interesting point. But if you can only hit those at 65% in the NBA, what kind of value does that bring? Or for every single time you're driving and attacking, a closeout, you're turning the ball over a few times because you actually cannot start a dribble from a standstill. I think a lot of the way that you generate value as a standstill passer is by also having the threat to drive downhill on a defense. Derek Lively is an interesting standstill passer because if you leave him butt booty naked wide open, he can put the ball on the ground one time and get right to the rim for a layup. And that is a threat. He puts that pressure on the defense. Penda does not. If you leave Penda wide open, he is not going to put that kind of pressure on the defense. He can in theory because he's a good straight line driver, but he can't finish with anybody rotating. He's not a particularly good kick out reader. There's just so many macro parts of his game missing that he cannot utilize the micro skills at any level. And that's kind of my worry, is that no matter how much better he's gotten, if you've gone from 5th percentile to 25th percentile, you're still bad, right? Like you're still not a functional player in that way. And I like Penda. I really like the stopping defense, but I just cannot see him making that kind of jump with the limited usage and the limited amount of reps he's gotten offensively and just the limited number of things he's done and doing anything of impact on an offensive side of an NBA court. It's just a really, really difficult sell for me.
Yeah, I fall right in the middle of you two. Listen, I think as we transition to Penda's value, there's just not quite enough for me to latch on to here for him to be a lottery guy like I kind of wanted. And Penda's a guy we've been following for a while now. I think Stone first texted us about him 2 years ago. Hey, you should watch this Noah Penda guy. He's pretty interesting. Okay, and the one thing that does, really pique my interest is I think the development track record has been good. Like he's gotten better every time I've gone back to watch him. But I'm just not sure that there is any skill to latch on to in a way that is, a building block for an NBA career. I think that potentially the shooting could get to a level where it's good enough to be survivable with the passing and defense. And that's why I'd still probably dropped him in the first round. Because again, if that shooting comes along, this is the type of player that's really, really valuable. But I can't get all the way where I wanted to be with Penda, which, to be honest, was a top 5 guy. Like that was where my brain was, just kind of looking through highlights and looking at the stat profile a little bit and thinking about having seen him before in the development trajectory. But I just can't get there. It's the production isn't quite good enough. The the winning is nice and the role he plays over there is nice, but there's just not one thing that he's good enough at right now to be a worthwhile lottery bet for me. I'd happily take him if I was a team like, I don't know, a team that already had my top 2 scorers and was already like a pretty good team. Like if I wanted my Obi Toppin replacement as the Pacers, I'd be pretty happy with Noah Penda. That's a great spot for him. Not because he's going to win immediately, because it's impossible to bet on rookies to actually do that, but because if he hits for a team like that, he's really valuable. But if he's not, like he's not worth taking if you're a team that might need more scoring production, because I just don't see a ton of paths to Penda being a valuable NBA scorer, or I don't think the passing is good enough to be a hang your hat on offensive skill. Like, he's not like quite a Draymond Green. Maybe that's like a ceiling offensively, but it would take a lot to get there. As much as I do like the processing and the decision making, and again, the defense is good but not great. So it's like he's just a good player, and there's a world that he sticks around for a while as like a ninth man. It'd be way more likely if he was American to do that. Just the truth. Not a lot of Europeans want to stick around as a ninth man, but that's kind of what I see for him as like a median outcome is good, fine NBA player who doesn't really impact winning, but is worthwhile to have around. But the upside being, potentially impactful playoff player is enough for me to want him in the first round. But there's just not a ton of stuff that I really latch onto to make him a lottery guy. Coop, do you want to give your ranking so Stone can end it with a positive?
Yes, I always prefer to end things with a positive. So I like Penda. I like the idea of a superstar stopper. I like that. I think that is enough to potentially, give him a bit more leeway, because he's a guy who can sit as your 12th man on your bench, and once a week he comes in and he gives Jason Tatum hell for 10 minutes. And maybe that's valuable, but like, I really have a hard time. I just think maybe some of this is like bias as someone who watched and enjoyed Usman Garuba on my team and cheered for him and wanted him to succeed, and just watched him fail pretty hard on a team where he had every opportunity to win. He had every opportunity to prove himself and stick around in the NBA. And he got multiple chances at that. He got to go into OKC and they didn't want him. He got to go and play for Golden State, and he couldn't stick there despite the fact that they had no depth at the forward spot. They have not had another 6'8" player who could do something there, and Garuba didn't cut it. And I just, maybe Garuba is better in my imagination because I was a younger scout and I didn't really know what I was looking at. And maybe Penda is just better and there's more there. I do think Penda is a better ball handler, and that could be enough because the handle with Garuba was so bad that it was just like disqualifying for an NBA player. But you have to be better if this is going to be your path to being a starter. So to me, he's just a bet at he's a good second rounder. I'd take Ace Bailey over him. I would take Malawach over him pretty easily, but I'd take him over Saraf. With Saraf, it's a lot of intangibles that I'm betting on. With Penda, there's at least something there. I'm betting on a specialist to come in, but it's so hard to survive as a specialist in this league, and you have to go to the exact right team to survive as a specialist, and the right kind of coach. Like, I think if the Rockets got him in the second round, he'd maybe stick around because he's just forward depth that you can throw at guys. And maybe a coach like Ime would love to have this kind of guy. Maybe he goes to the Heat and they just need more big men who can, pretend to do stuff for them and run basic DHOs. Or I do think he'd be a guy on the Lakers where he would just not have to do very much, and they just need guys who can make the right decision. But I just don't think that that's a guy worth taking in the first round. A guy who, to me, at his best, is a specialist. Right. I just don't see the offense coming to where he will ever not be a specialist. So he's a second rounder pretty easily for me.
Yeah. I guess unsurprisingly, I have him highest on my board, currently at 8 on my board, where I think for me, and I really wanted to get him into my top 5, but it was heart over brain on that decision, and I couldn't get him over Yakachonis as much as I wanted to. He's exactly the kind of player I like. I mean, there's no doubt about that. Like, this is the exact Stone Hansen type type prospect, and I am somewhat fighting that. I don't want to just put him there because I like watching him play basketball, and I'm trying to be as objective as I can with it too. So I'm fluctuating between like 8 and 10 right now on my board, and I'm pretty confident that he'll be a top 10 player this year for me. I think the the thing with me, I have him like I just for reference, I guess I have him over Malawak, over Newell, over Fears, and I think for me, it's just even if Penda, there's outcomes where Penda doesn't stick in the NBA, but even if Penda doesn't stick, that's someone I still want to take a swing on because at Penda's worst outcomes, he's still a winning basketball player. Like this is a guy that when he's on the court leads to winning basketball games, and uh, maybe that's not he's not talented enough a scorer to stay on the court, and that's the concern, obviously. But there's no world where he is a negative basketball player and making he's such a good decision making machine that like having him over someone like Malawak for me is fairly easy. I mean, I like Malawak to an extent, but there's a lot of worlds where Malawak is on the court and just playing losing basketball, and that sounds mean, but and it's hard to really, I guess, find the right words to describe what I'm saying. But if you've evaluated basketball for a long time, then you probably understand, or you've watched basketball enough where there's definitely winning basketball and losing basketball players, and some players have those outcomes of both. For me, Penda has no outcomes where he's a losing basketball player. There's outcomes where he's not an NBA player, and that sounds weird to say because he's just not enough of a talented scorer to justify being on the court to make those winning decisions. But there's never an outcome where he's on the court and losing you basketball games because he's just making the wrong plays and being a losing player. So that's for me the biggest justification and the biggest thing I look for in all of my process is does this guy play winning basketball? And for me, Penda checks that box, and that's why I have him as a top 10 guy.
Absolutely fair. And I think that is probably way too long on Noah Penda, who is a consensus back of the first round, early second round prospect that we talked for almost a full hour on. But this has been great. We hope you guys have enjoyed. Make sure you give us a like, rating, review. Make sure you like and subscribe and hit the bell for notifications on YouTube. Oh yeah, I'm getting that thing. I'm in my bag with my
Dude,
outfit.
that was aura. That was crazy.
You know what else is aura? We have 69 subscribers right now. So as much as I want the subscriber count to go up, it is nice for a moment to stay at this number.
But yeah, this has been great for Coop at Ali_Oop_Coop for Stone Out Report _Court. I'm Bryce 114, and we hope we hit our ceiling today. Thank you.
Okay. Whenever you guys are ready.
Hello, everybody, and welcome. Actually, why am I doing an intro? My fault. Let me walk back in.